Thank you for staying with us on Daybreak. And as I've mentioned, we're getting into the conversation on the state of the fight against HIV and AIDS, with World AIDS Day right around the corner, being marked on Sunday. The goal is to end it by 2030. But where are we in the fight? I'll just recap who we have in studio. I'm joined by Dr. Ruth Libon-Masha, who is the CEO of the National Syndemic Diseases Control Council, Professor Walter Jauko, who is a microbiology and tropical diseases expert. We also have in studio Dr. Victor Bampoe, who is the UNAIDS Country Director, Rita Gatonye, a harm reduction champion, and we have teen parents, Wesley Otieno, also known as Wex. Good to have you in studio. And Zipporah Acheng, who is also a HIV champion and a teen mom. Good to have you here as well. So I read out some figures earlier. According to the World Health Organization, globally 39.9 million people are living with HIV. 630,000 deaths were attributed to HIV-related causes in 2023, and 1.3 million people acquired HIV in 2023. But what is the situation nationally? I'll start with you, Dr. Masha. Where are we as a country 40 years since it was discovered?
Thank you very much. So, it's good to highlight the global statistics, because within that global statistics, Kenya is one of the countries that also has a very high burden of HIV. We have 1.378 million people living with HIV in Kenya, and out of those, about 71,000 are children aged 0 to 14 years. In 2023, the number of AIDS-related deaths were about 20,480, and that makes Kenya to be one of the countries with the highest number of AIDS-related deaths, despite availability of treatment. In addition to that, the country had 16,752 new HIV infections, and of those infections, over 3,700 were children, 8,937 were women, and men were about 4,072. And we've made progress in the last 10 years, significant progress. We've reduced the number of new HIV infections by about 83%. Again, we've been able to identify at least 95% of people living with HIV, and put about 94% of them, 97% of them on treatment, and 94% have achieved viral suppression, meaning that they can be able to live a healthy life because the virus is suppressed within their bodies. So what is the challenge? The current challenge the country has is that, for example, while men and boys are fewer, about 485,000 men living with HIV in Kenya, when you go to the number of AIDS-related deaths, you find that we have almost half, almost 50% of those deaths are men and boys. And mostly we are losing men aged between 40 to 45 and above. And that means that we lose a lot of breadwinners because we are a patriarchal society, and we find those men mostly coming to the clinic too late, and they come mostly with tuberculosis. The other challenge we have in the epidemic is that whereas we have done a good job, new infections are still domiciled between people between the ages of 0 to about 35. So more than 70% of all our infections are among young people. We are also beginning to see a challenge of what you're calling HIV in retirees, older persons. And this is something we must start talking about, because we have about over 700 new HIV infections in 2023 were among people aged 50 and above. And this cohort also present another challenge because they come to the hospital too late, and because they also mostly have other diseases such as diabetes, hypertensive disorders. By the time they find out they have HIV, it's too late, and they come with what we call advanced HIV disease. So we've made progress, but what is remaining is stubborn. The stubbornness comes because if we have girls, about 240,000 girls who got pregnant last year and disrupted school, it means they had a sexual intercourse that was unprotected. And that, happens between a boy and a girl or a man and a woman. And in this case, these are children. When you look at the children aged 10 to 14, again, there are infections therein. And there are also these same children also giving birth in our facilities. So the one thing we must address as a country is also sexual and gender-based violence. Because these children, when we speak about adolescent pregnancy, in our law, those are defilements. Because we don't have a law that allows a child for 10 to 14 to be pregnant. So those are some of the stubborn challenges that we have: sexual gender-based violence, pregnancies, and new HIV infections among girls and young women. We go move again, the infections coming among all the younger people. Then we have now the problem of retirees, meaning that our challenge is how do we then end AIDS when new infections are coming too early. And we have to grow all these people to adulthood with antiretroviral medicines.
All right. Dr. Victor, I'll ask you to reflect on the situation globally. Are we on track to end new infections by 2030?
Thank you very much, Olive, and thanks for the invitation. I want to say two things before I go on to that. First of all, to talk about UNAIDS, and UNAIDS is the joint UN program on HIV and AIDS, which leads with the global advocacy, technical assistance, and provision of support to countries, government, non-state actors in this fight against HIV and AIDS. And we have 11 UN co-sponsors, so it's the UN coming together to work with countries. Secondly, I think we are winning some of the battles against HIV and AIDS, but I think the main war is yet to be won. Now, coming back to your question, I think many of us remember the early 80s when HIV first became an issue. Mm-hmm. And you eloquently espoused some of the numbers, and I think Dr. Masha has also done that. To date, we have almost 90 million people who have been infected with HIV, and about 42 million have died. So that's the global picture. You talked about the fact that now we are at 39.9 million. So if you look at from 2010 to 2023, then there has been a 43% decrease in the every year in the number of new infections, and a 30% decrease in the number of deaths. So we are not there yet, and I'll tell you why we are not there. We are not there yet because on the 9th of June 2021, all the countries around the world signed what we call the Political Declaration on HIV and AIDS, where we wanted to do certain things. Number one, we wanted to make sure that 95% of all people in every country who have HIV infection know their status. They know they have HIV. 95% of those who know their status are also on antiretroviral drugs. And out of that, 95% are virally suppressed so that the virus is not within their blood and they cannot transmit it. That was one of the things we wanted to do. The second thing was that we wanted to reduce the number of new infections right down to about, to a level around 370,000 around the world, and the number of deaths to below 250,000. And we wanted to do this by 2025, which is next year. And we also wanted to make sure that we end AIDS as a public health problem by 2030. So we are not quite there yet. For example, of the 39.9 million people who have HIV, 9.3 million people are still not on antiretroviral therapy. About 30.6 to 30.7 million people are on antiretroviral therapy. So there are some ways to go, and there's still a lot of work to be done. But I want to reiterate what Dr. Masha said, that significant progress has been made, especially in Kenya. Kenya is a leader in terms of the response to HIV and AIDS. Lots of good work going on in Kenya. We just need to sustain this progress and make sure that by 2025 and by 2030, we hit the targets that we agreed jointly.
All right. Over the decades, there have been various advancements. And I remember growing up and learning about the ABCs: abstain, B was be faithful, C, use a condom. Since then, various advancements. We have pre-exposure prophylaxis, post-exposure prophylaxis, in addition to the roles that antiretrovirals play in the quality of life of persons who have been infected with HIV/AIDS. When you reflect on the last 4 decades, Professor Jauko, what do you see as the pivotal moments where medical advancement is concerned?
Thank you very much first of all, for inviting me to your studio. There have been tremendous advances with regard to the fight against HIV. I can just point a few. One is the discovery that treatment, when you're on treatment, you cannot transmit the virus when the viral load in your blood is undetectable. So the famous U equals U, which means undetectable, means untransmissible. This is important because it has helped people to live normal lives. It has converted HIV from a deadly disease to a chronic disease. It means that even discordant couples where one person is HIV positive, the other one is HIV negative, can live normal lives, can produce children, because as long as the viral load is undetectable, then the HIV-infected partner cannot transmit infection to the uninfected partner. Number two is the famous pre-exposure prophylaxis, as you've talked about. We know that women are disproportionately affected by HIV for biological reasons, for social reasons like inability to negotiate for safe sex and so on. Here is therefore, you get a situation where they can be able to take a pill when they're going to have a risky sexual relationship, and they can be assured that they'll be protected. So that's what you call pre-exposure prophylaxis. It's called pre-exposure because you're taking it before you're exposed to the risk of HIV. Now we are moving even further to that, whereby we are talking about long-term injectables, whereby rather than taking a pill every time before you have you're exposed to HIV, you can get an injection, and it's being worked on that it can be able to get an injection that would last 2 to 3 months, and maybe even longer. Research is still ongoing on that. So these are major advances that have been made in the field of HIV, but we are working on the biggest of those advances would be the HIV vaccine. And the vaccine has been a challenge because the virus is also very complicated. People ask why we got COVID vaccine very quickly and HIV has taken as long. It's just because the virus has a lot of differences, mutates very quickly. Nobody has ever recovered naturally from the HIV. So we don't really know the immune system that works, so that you design a vaccine that works according to that immune system.
You know, it's part of the reason that does HIV still enjoy the same, I don't know how to put it. You know, that there was, when it happened and it was an emergency situation, you know, all hands on deck, does it still enjoy, or I don't use the term enjoy, but have the same backing in terms of the search for a cure, vaccine?
Yes, so that's a good question, and that's why we have the World AIDS Day every December 1st, just to remind the world that the HIV needs to continue to be on the table because there are many competing interests, and so there is a tendency to forget that HIV is still here with us. Those numbers that you talked about are people. When you're talking about 39 million people infected, they are human beings. When you talk about 1.3 million new infections every year, so that is why we have the World AIDS Day, just to keep on the agenda. There's a tendency for people to think that HIV is no longer a major concern, reduce funding for research, reduce funding for looking for a HIV vaccine and so on. So that is where we are. It's not getting that much attention as it deserves, but it should.
Okay. Rita, you are a harm reduction champion. What does that mean, and how did you get into that?
So thank you, Olive, and again, thank you for having us here. A harm reduction champion, in simple terms, is somebody who champions for harm reduction, which is a set of principles that goes about responding to issues of drugs differently from the traditional models of prevention, while still keeping in mind all the same goals. So how I got into that is through my own experiences, having used drugs in the past, having used injectable drugs in the past, and having been able to access harm reduction services in Kenya and seeing the progress and seeing the potential of harm reduction as a concept to really effect change.
Sorry, Rita, I'll have to stop cut you short. There's a problem with your sound, but we're sorting it out. I'll come back. We'll come back to you. Zipporah?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, how are you?
I'm very fine.
What significance does World AIDS Day hold for you?
Well, this day is a big day for me because I am a HIV champion. I'm a woman who was born with HIV, and I've been living with it for 23 years of my age, from 2001 till now. And World AIDS Day, it's a celebration day for us because we always feel love, the commemoration of the people who we lost. And again, we make people to understand that there is HIV. Because of the prevention, it has made people to relax. Simply because if now there's a prevention for HIV, then we have to relax. But no, we don't have, because we are dealing with the virus. Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible. You're 23 years of age. You look amazing, healthy. You look like you're living, a good life. Professor Joko, is that on account of medical advancement?
Oh, yes, sure. For those who are old enough to remember how people who are infected by HIV looked in the 80s, and, you'll see this is a great advancement. I think the message is that if you are HIV infected, you should be on antiretroviral drugs and you live a normal life. Mm-hmm. And here's an example.
It is. And Zipporah, you're so open about it. Do you encounter any stigma still?
Yeah, I do. But I don't rely on stigma because I'm not living for stigma. I'm living my own life. And if today I will say that stigma will kill me, I have a daughter who is 3 years old. She's negative. If today I let stigma kill my self-esteem, then my daughter will be left an orphan. No one should take care of her. So talking open, it's because I'm truly living with HIV. I'm a beautiful story from the ARVs that they are working. And again, I don't depend on stigma. You just talk. It's your own story, but I know my own story. Mm. Yeah.
All right. Wex, you're also a HIV champion. How did that come about?
Ijakuwa rahisi. Ijakuwa rahisi. Nimekuwa na challenges kadhaa sana. So kuwa HIV positive na bado kwa mbaba ijakuwa rahisi kwa sababu hata familia kwanza before ijue iku accept kama uko na HIV kwa rahisi. Nakumbuka shule hata pia siku anaweza kumeza hizo dawa mzuri juu mabeshte yangu wako hapo mamode aliza mabeshte kwanza alikuwa ananiuliza hizi dawa za nini. Hiyo ni nyakati nilikuwa natumia kila siku hiyo ni asubuhi na jioni. Nauliza hizi dawa za nini? Sasa inabidi niwachoche. Hii dawa ni ya malaria. Wananiuliza kwani malaria yako ni ya kila siku haiishi? Naambia nyinyi msijali, ni mambo yangu tu, ni malaria tu ya kawaida na itaisha. So ikaenda hivyo until sasa. Na pia siku anapenda kusema niko nayo. Hata sasa niko sure kuna nyajui niko nayo bado. But kuisema sana pia kwa watu haijakuwa rahisi. Na pia kwa kama mzazi si kitu rahisi pia. Juu pia familia yako ikigundua tu wewe mzazi lazima pia watakutenga wakuulize umefanya nini sasa. Mbona umeamua kuwa na mtoto? Kitu kama hiyo.
Ulizaliwa na HIV au?
Nimezaliwa na HIV, sasa niko 21, nimeishi nayo. Mamangu ndo alikuwa nayo.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, listening to those stories, Dr. Marsha, the difference in generations in that while Zipporah and let me use your case, Zipporah, if you don't mind. Zipporah having been born with HIV, but she has had a child who is negative. Is that a credit to not only the advancements in medicine, but also awareness?
Thank you very much. One of the biggest or largest or the best moment in our lives story is actually the story that has been presented by Zipporah and Wayne. Because mother-to-child transmission of HIV. And now we are also saying, we don't forget that also you can have father transmitting to the mother, then who transmit to the child during breastfeeding, birth, and during the pregnancy, is actually one of the successes we are celebrating. When you look at some years ago, the numbers that were being infected with HIV from mother to child were too high. In fact, at some point, we had transmission rates of about 21% average. But currently, we have a transmission rate of about 7.3%. For the last 10 years, we've come from about 13.9 to 7.3%. But allow me to say that Kenya is one of the 22 countries in the world that still has the highest rates of mother-to-child transmission of HIV. And this is really a big challenge for us because we know it works. We have heard from the two that they actually have negative children. So where is the challenge? The challenge is, number one, that the mothers who are giving birth in our facilities are children and the adolescents, and they come sometimes too late. But also we have the issue of stigma, where when women get pregnant, they also don't find out their status before the pregnancy. Because if you find your HIV status and it's positive before pregnancy, you take proactive steps to begin making sure that your viral load is suppressed and you carry on with your pregnancy, you're on medication, and when the child is born, they're given prophylaxis drugs, and that child actually stays negative. But then when sometimes it's too late, it means sometimes that if the viral load was high, and Professor Jacob will probably mention to that it's easier to transmit than during pregnancy. And then again, childbirth comes in. If you're not attended through stillbirth delivery, again, the chances of transmitting the virus to the unborn or to the baby becomes higher. Now, we also have breastfeeding period. If a mother is not on ARVs or interrupts ARVs during breastfeeding period, we also have that challenge. But we also not forget that we have women who have left the hospital with a negative child, and they themselves negative. But during the breastfeeding period, somehow, probably from their sexual partners, they get infected, and then they breastfeed and their children get infected. And that's one message we must now begin to tell our citizens, that as long as you have a child breastfeeding, the father also needs to remember that he is also responsible for making sure that there's no disease being transmitted to the child through breast milk. And this is why we are having this World AIDS Day, to spotlight on the role of men and boys within this whole discussion, because sometimes when you say mother-to-child transmission, it is assumed the virus only comes from the mother. There are counties that have really extremely very high transmission rates. A mother in Wajir County.
Dr. Masha, we'll just put a pin in it because we need to take a break, but we'll come back. You are on the point of counties, right?
Yes.
And what is happening at the county level. We'll also come back and speak more on the role of men and boys, as you've raised, and also access to ARV. So stay tuned to Daybreak. The hashtag is Daybreak. The X handles are at @OBarrows, @Citizen TV Kenya.